way to follow that along. So I'm going to go on and introduce our moderators today. That we're very, very fortunate that the folks that are going to lead us in conversation have had interesting lives themselves. I'm gonna, was there someone else talking there? Okay. I think someone didn't have their mic on, cut off. Okay, so I want to introduce Mariah James. Mariah is a third-year PhD student in UNC's Department of Anthropology. After graduating with a BA in anthropology from the University of Maryland, she worked at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture as a Robert H. Smith Fund intern, probably one of the first, as that was a new program not too long ago, and was also employed by the PG, or as we call it PG, but Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center. She recently received a graduate research fellowship from the National Science Foundation to support her dissertation research on Black elite identity formation. She will be defending her master's thesis on class in Black communities this November. You all should thank her, because normally someone in her position takes no jobs, nothing, that they are dead set in that works in their presentation. But Mariah graciously agreed to serve this role today, and we're immensely thankful for that. We also have Daniel Johnson with us. Daniel served as a journalist with the United States Army in Iraq and is a Roy H. Park Fellow at the Hussman School of Journalism and Media here at UNC at Chapel Hill. He is currently studying media and communications, and he is the author of #Inherent Resolve, which is a book on his unit's experience in the war against ISIS. And I'm pretty soon that he will be fully immersed in his program as well, and we may not be able to get back to him, but we are immensely happy and proud that he's with us today. So thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Mariah. And I'm going to turn it over to you and let you run the program as you see fit. Thanks again, and thanks to all of you who are joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Tur, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Mayor Lee, for taking time out of your schedule. I understand you're very busy. I was wondering, Mayor Lee, if you wanted to start the conversation off with a few thoughts based on the theme you want to talk about today.
I'm happy to do that, Daniel. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the privilege of being asked to come and participate in this conversation, and I really have been looking forward to it with great anticipation. You know, recently I was doing an interview with a reporter, and he said, when your life is ended, what do you want people to remember about you? And I thought for a little while, and finally I said, I want people to remember me as one who saw the impossible and went out and worked hard to achieve the impossible. But beyond that, and most important, I was a role model that inspired young people to see the impossible and achieve what appears to be impossible, because everything is possible. And so as we sit here and talk today, I'd like to go back and talk to you a little about how I got to where I am. And once in a while, I really do have to pinch myself to see, is this real? Because I arrived in Chapel Hill in 1964 as a graduate student, after being encouraged to enroll in the university by a former president of the university, Dr. Frank Porter Graham. And I had no idea that I would settle here. I certainly came to get my degree. My intentions were to go back to Georgia, especially Atlanta, where I grew up. But I like to tell folk I got tall and my heels got stuck and never left North Carolina. I finished my degree, and before I actually had gotten my degree, Duke called, having gotten a grant from the Ford Foundation to do research on early childhood education. And they offered me more money than I ever dreamed I'd ever make. And so I joined that research project and worked there for 2 years. And I was in the middle of that and transferring from that research project to the main campus and an administrative position at Duke. My wife and I, when I accepted the position for the research project, had a choice. We could live in Chapel Hill, or we could move and live in Duke, because there was special housing in Duke for people who were certain level. We chose to live in Chapel Hill because we thought, well, it's a progressive, liberal community, and we won't have any difficulties here. So we went out to buy a house, and that's when reality set in, that Chapel Hill was basically not that much different between many other sections of North Carolina and throughout the South, because only one realtor would even talk to us about selling a house. We bought a house eventually and lived under the threat of death for the next year after we moved in. What drove me to get involved in public life and local politics was the City Council of Chapel Hill, at my request, refused to pass an open housing ordinance. There were two problems in Chapel Hill that centered around that. One was that people of color had never been able to buy a house outside of the traditional Black section of town. But more importantly, students were having difficulty as well. And so I felt that, I apologize for that phone, but I felt that it was very important for us to succeed in that. So we bought the house, and I felt the city council was not being very fair in terms of not passing an open housing ordinance. So to make a long story short, I decided to run for mayor. What actually motivated me to get into politics at that time was when I looked at the Black section of town, there was a lack of water and sewer extension into the Black community. There were unpaved streets that they've been asking to be paved that were not being responded to. There was a big old hole in the middle of the Black community that received all of the runoff from the main sections of town that was a tremendous community hazard and danger. And if you looked around, housing was a problem. There was almost no housing to speak of. 60 units of public housing with a waiting list of more than 250 people, just as starters. Recreation was almost non-existent. There was one private swimming pool in Chapel Hill, and that was a very poor swimming pool in the Black section of town called Robinson Street Center at the time, now Hargraves Center. And the list went on. And so I felt by running for mayor, I would be able to address some of those problems, and I did. Increase the housing. One of the main promises I made was to start a bus system. And so I started the transit system, embraced students, invited them to participate in the community, expanded recreation, and opened the first mayor's office in the history of Chapel Hill, physical, with a staff. And hired the first Black to hold an administrative position in Chapel Hill. So those are some of the things that I felt were important that could be achieved through that process. My journey in public life has been really that of dreams are made of, because I've just been very blessed to have so many successes in that, and engaged in so many different facets. I did establish a strong relationship between the university and the community, which was suffering from some strain over the years because the university owned all of the utilities in Chapel Hill: telephone, light, water. And my goal was to get the university out of the utilities business and hopefully transfer those utilities to the town. It didn't quite work out that way because Duke Power ended up with the electrical company, Southern Bell at that time, telephone, and we were stuck with the water system, which was almost every year suffering from lack of water, a drought. But the thing that I think jumps out, and I'll stop on that note, is that young people never felt that they were getting the kind of attention to some of their interests and some of their needs by the leaders of Chapel Hill. So I started the first Mayor's Youth Council, and these young people would engage in coming up with what they thought were needs, and then they were allowed to come and make those presentations to the governing board, and we would not only listen, but we would respond. As far as the university community is concerned, when a month after I was elected, food service workers on the campus of UNC went on strike, first time in the history of the university. I was able to put the pressure on the powers to be, and we were able to respond to the needs of these workers in terms of increasing their pay and so forth. And so when I talk about the fact that the more changed things change, sometimes they seem to remain the same. During that time, food service workers, like workers today, were feeling put out because they were not getting decent hourly wages. Today, you look at those same workers, and today they're feeling left out because they're not getting decent wages. At that time, people were concerned because there was not affordable housing for folk of a certain income level. Look at Chapel Hill today, there is still not enough affordable housing for certain people of an income level, especially people who are working in public offices like police and fire and so forth, and even in some cases, teachers. And there is a long list of things, items that I worked on when I was in mayor and have been worked on since. And I'm not saying that the response hasn't changed, because people are working just as hard to try to respond to these, but they are still problems that have to be dealt with. So my hope is that our discussion today will focus on some of the issues as you all see them, and we can talk about what response was made in between 1969 and 1975 when I was in office, what kind of response has been made in between, and where are we today, and what do we expect from those persons who are currently running, and what response are we making to the youth of this community, and what efforts are we putting in to maintain the kind of trust within our law enforcement that we worked so hard to try to build when I was mayor. Basically, that might give you some thoughts of what's on my mind, and as such, allow you to ponder some other questions that we can think about and talk about.
Thank you so much for that, and for setting the stage for us. Before we begin our questions, I did want to remind our audience that we will be having a Q&A session towards the end of this program. So if you develop questions as we go, you can go ahead and submit them, so then we can see them and address them towards the end. So Mayor Lee, keeping in mind and keeping in line with this event's theme of thinking about what has changed and what stayed the same, I'd like to start with getting your take on education then and now. So you've been involved with education in the Triangle area since the 1960s. What do you feel has changed for Black students and educators since that time period? And what do you feel has stayed the same? Well,
certainly during the 1960s, segregation in public schools was still very much a reality. Wake County did not actually uh, integrate its county and city schools until about 1976. Before then, the Wake County system was majority white, and in the city, majority Black. And obviously, there was disparity in terms of funding for education during that time. Durham did not integrate its two systems until 1992. By that time, I was in the North Carolina Senate, and we introduced a resolution that forced all systems in the state of North Carolina to merge their systems and desegregate all of their schools. And that, of course, started a trend which went across the state. At that time, there were two kinds of experiences. Black schools were not being well funded, but the Black schools had the best teachers, and the students were getting the best nurturing within those schools. The white schools were well funded. They had good teachers, but certainly there were more choices for whites at that time for employment than for Blacks at that time. And of course, when the integration came, because Chapel Hill schools were not actually integrated until about 1966, when New Chapel Hill High School was built. And during that time, we saw the loss of a lot of high quality Black educators. And of course, Black students began to really suffer under the integrated system. Since that time, there has been a lot of emphasis placed on making sure that students are recognized and given the extra help they need in order to succeed. Teacher pay at that time was lousy. It has certainly shown some progress, but not nearly enough. We were doing research through a program that I mentioned at Duke called the Education Improvement Program to try to find out how can we get more emphasis and train teachers more to be responsive to the needs of the students. Today, I think our educational system is stronger. Our university system is more open. The one area where I believe that we have made tremendous progress has been the strengthening of what was at that time the technical schools, now community colleges, that allow students to have greater access to going to a post-secondary institution without having to go to a university. So I'm extremely pleased with the progress we've made, but I'm also disappointed with the lack of accomplishments in terms of making sure every student who attends a public school has a chance to develop the kind of credentials that allows them then to be competitive in a college. But the choices are greater. Certainly, I know there's been a big question about charter schools. I think charter schools have a very valuable role to play for certain individuals. And so I've been a strong advocate for having charter schools, but I've been an even stronger advocate for improving public schools. And I really think that without a doubt, unless we put forth greater effort, we're going to start going backwards instead of going forward. One final point, I'm still involved in education. I am now heading up, co-chairing a commission that's focused on what the public education and universities should look like in the 22nd, 23rd century. And I think it's going to have to be different. It's going to have to be different because the virus has forced us to take another look at how we educate young people. When we couldn't go into the classroom, we had to try to educate virtually. I don't think it worked. And I think that has to be an integral part of what we do. But we learned also then, as if we didn't know, that many of the young people who need this nurturing more, who need this access more, are the ones who don't have access to the internet and who don't have access to virtuality. So I'm not at all satisfied with where we are in our educational systems, P, what I call post kindergarten and post-secondary. I think there's just so much more work to be done. And I'm hoping that young leaders like you will be the ones to recognize and be able to take the reins and move this forward even more.
Mayor Lee, thank you for your answer to that question. Speaking more on the theme of education and inequalities in our not just elementary education system, but our post-secondary education system. Recently here at the Hudson School, which, you know, like the sun's I mean right now, the school was embroiled in a controversy when we tried to attempt to hire Nicole Hannah-Jones, where there was a lot of conservative pushback and some from even our probably biggest donor due to our work on the 1619 project. What are your thoughts on the controversy and the issue? What do you think it means for the role of African-American educators who want to teach in the state in the future?
Well, I was extremely disappointed with the response to hiring
exposure notifications
Dr.
were
Jones.
1. Your iPhone uses Bluetooth to keep the log throughout the day.
I
Your
really
iPhone looks for iOS
thought
and Android phones that have
that
exposure
she was
notifications
a
turned on and feeds only
well-qualified
14 people with their
person,
shared identifiers.
and
2.
that
People can report that they have COVID-19. If someone gets a positive diagnosis, they can report it and anonymously notify those who have been near them. 3. If you've been exposed, your public health authority can notify you.
I don't know why that phone kicked on, but I thought she was well qualified for the position. And it reminded me again, as things change, they sometimes remain the same. The sun is really getting you, isn't it, Daniel? Because in 1969, the School of Social Work had asked me to consider joining the faculty. I had agreed that we would do that, and we were in the midst of negotiating my salary for me to leave Duke and come back to UNC. When the Board of Trustees, after I left, announced that I would be running for mayor, directed the chancellor to cut down that negotiation. So I was not allowed to negotiate. And the reasoning was that if I didn't get elected mayor, which most people felt I wouldn't, then the chancellor could hire me as a member of the faculty. I got elected, and the Board of Trustees said, no, you cannot hire him because it would be a bad precedent to hire the mayor of Chapel Hill to be a faculty member. They forgot one thing. There was a person at that time who was mayor of Chapel Hill, had served as a faculty member of the university. So when I looked at what was happening to Dr. Hannah-Jones, I just felt that we have not gotten as far as we thought we had gotten. Now, let me make make this clear. In my case, it was a Democratic dominated Board of Trustees. In this case, it's a Republican dominated Board of Trustees. So even across the board, the same struggles that we had under Democratic regimes now have transferred over under Republican regimes. I think that the Board of Trustees has more interest in pursuing philosophical objectives as opposed to objectives that would serve the community better. And I'm just very disappointed that it's going to be such that it's going to be a mark on the university. But as far as future faculty is concerned, I think this may have been a blessing in disguise, because what it has done now is to bring a higher degree of focus on why we need to be more aggressive in pushing forward to bring on people of color, of all ethnic groups, to be a part of the educational system. This afternoon, I'll be participating in a seminar talking about the very same thing, is that when you have an educational environment where there is not the broad-based, widespread skill level and interest and philosophies and identification, you lose the interest of students who are not identified with the majority of people there. So I'm confident that although it looked really bad at the time, and we lost a really good person, I'm delighted she went to an historical Black school, but I'm also disappointed that if we don't learn from this, it will have been a waste on everybody's part. I do commend the fact that the chancellor did the best he could to try and handle it. I was sorry that we also lost a good dean from your school who was really pushing hard for this as well. So we should certainly encourage those who stood up to continue to do so, but we shouldn't be disheartened by the fact that the short-sightedness of the Board of Trustees led us down this path.
Thank you so much for that insight. You touched on this a bit, but in continuing to think about African Americans and their relationship with Chapel Hill, when you decided to run for mayor, what was the reaction from UNC's campus, from the Chapel Hill community, and then from other African Americans in the area?
When I announced I didn't really announce my candidate to run for mayor, to be honest. I had been talking with a friend of mine who was a white Presbyterian minister here in Chapel Hill, a young fellow, and I was trying to persuade him to run for mayor. And I promised if he would run for mayor, I'd run for a seat on the council. Well, he wanted me to run and he couldn't talk me into it. So he went to the local newspaper and told the editor that he had a scoop and that he'd heard I was going to announce my candidacy for mayor. And without even checking it out, without calling or anything, the paper ran a headline, "Black to run for mayor," with my picture. My wife saw it before I could get home and by the time I got home, that was not a pretty sight because she did not want me running for public office. It split the Chapel Hill community almost down the middle. Half the people said I should run. The other half said, "You're out of your mind. You can't get elected. Don't bother wasting your time." I finally got it cleared through my superiors at Duke and declared my candidacy. And we put together a very strong campaign. For the first time, there was excitement within the Black community that people had never seen before in terms of wanting to be involved and engaged. And there was a lady who worked at the hospital by the name of Ms. Rebecca Clark, who was really one of the feistiest people you'd ever want to see. And she was so delighted that she's going to have a chance to express what she'd always felt. And much of this was carryover from the civil rights demonstration. In Chapel Hill, some of the nastiest treatment of demonstrators took place on Franklin Street. And people remembered that. They were also upset because in 1960, Dr. King had come to make a speech in Chapel Hill and was going to speak at the First Baptist Church downtown, the white church. And the trustees of the church said he could not come in the sanctuary. And so that was that kind of carryover within the Black community. So my candidacy gave people a chance to protest. And that's kind of how we approached it, as a protest. We were going to force whoever ran against me to commit to take care of some of the problems that had to be dealt with in the broader community, but more importantly, had been denied in the Black community. But the campus itself the students were extremely excited. Some faculty members were very excited. The younger faculty members were excited. The older faculty members were very reserved and not so excited. But the university community was very much involved to the extent through students and through certain faculty members, a lot of the faculty members. I got elected because no candidate had ever made the kind of broad sweeping proposals that I had made. I made those proposals, Mariah and Daniel, because I was sure I wouldn't have to worry about implementing them. I could just have a whole list. Unfortunately, I got elected, and not only did I have to end up implementing those proposals, the transit system, the paving of the streets, the recreational needs, and so forth, but I was fortunate to get most of it done. But without students, without faculty at the university, without progressives who were citizens living in Chapel Hill, and without the Black community. The Black population at that time made up less than 10% of the population of Chapel Hill. But that less than 10% was so key because we turned out a higher percentage of the Black vote at that time that had ever been turned out in an election in Chapel Hill. So in spite of that, there was unity within Chapel Hill. And the night I was elected, I think it brought the community together in a way because no other event in Chapel Hill had brought as many people downtown to celebrate that victory except the university winning an NCAA championship. It was amazing what happened there. So I had a lot of goodwill, a lot of good support, and I was lucky to get elected along with me 2 council members who were very supportive, which gave me a majority of the council.
Thank you for the story. That's pretty funny that your friend went to the President's of the National Guarantee. I didn't know that. That's hilarious. Once you're in office, I know there's a debate then and debate now about what some would consider as accommodation or making compromise to work with Black political actors. Of course, there's not factions, but you have people who feel that collective action can be done in the streets or through protests, and others who feel that it can be done through the political system. What would you say to these claims or debates? And in your mind, what does compromise look like? I understand that you worked to get the Wilmington 10 released while you're working in state government.
Yes, I think that people sometimes see compromise as a dirty word. When I was in graduate school, and we'd have hot debates with my colleagues, student colleagues, they all hated the idea that you would compromise, that you had to dig in, you had to be committed to what you wanted, and there was no other way to go. We're seeing a little bit of a struggle of that right now in Washington among Democrats, where the progressives and the moderates and the conservatives have different views about how the Biden agenda should be actually implemented. And I learned to compromise even as mayor of Chapel Hill, that what I've said to young people, and I've lectured to a number of student bodies and political groups, and is that you start out with believing what you want is the ideal, and the ideal is never real. You have to recognize that other people have a point of view, and you have to respect that point of view. And that a little bit of something is better than a whole lot of nothing. And sometimes if you walk away without getting something, you can also build. If you get part of what you are seeking, you can build on that to come back later and try to get the other part of what you're seeking. Tell you what, when I offered to pass, and I use this as an example, when I proposed the bus system in Chapel Hill, I wanted a first-class bus system. I wanted it to be Chapel Hill and Carrboro. And I put forth this great plan to go out. And a lot of people said, you know, you really ought to cut it back. And I said, no, we're not going to cut it back. We're going to go for the whole ball of wax. Well, I went for the whole ball of wax, and guess what? I lost. The legislation was voted down. And so I got nothing. I came back and listened to the people who had advised me earlier, and I made a compromise, was to focus only on Chapel Hill and the university. And that's what they had asked me to do in the first place. But I was dug in. So and we won, and the bus system got built. So there's just one small example of a number of ways in which one achieves an outcome. May not be totally what one wants. Young people sometimes want to not put in the work to do what needs to be done in order to get something that is beneficial as opposed to nothing. I get a little annoyed when I see people go in the street and march and demonstrate. And that's all they want to do. They want to go demonstrate and march. That they need to understand that the civil rights movement was not won in the streets. The streets only called attention to the problem. The actual winning of the ultimate outcome was done in the back rooms with the decision makers, with people who would sit around table and negotiate, with Dr. King engaged in talking with folk and keeping people. But you do need that activist. You do need that activism. And that to me is extremely important. One other point I'll make, I know I'm talking too long, but one other point I'll make is that when I was with Governor Hunt, the great pressure on me was to do something about freeing a group of young people in Wilmington who had been arrested, called the Wilmington 10. And it was led by a fellow by the name of Ben Chavis. And Ben and his group had burned down some buildings in Wilmington, and they ended up getting huge, just unrealistic sentences to jail. And of course, when Governor Hunt got elected and I was appointed to his cabinet, people expected that between the two of us, we were going to free the Wilmington 10. Well, obviously there was resistance within his administration, but I was one of the persons who was pushing to get the Wilmington 10 free, because I was getting huge pressure from within the Black community across the state. We negotiated, and one group was telling Governor Hunt, don't do it. The other group was saying, you need to do it. And I was pushing him to do it. So I came up with a plan. Why don't we free every member of that group, but we hold Ben Chavis, the leader, back, and we will at least accomplish one step. Then we'll go back later on and try to get Ben out. That was the plan that was implemented. And of course, people thought I had sold out, which is fine. If you're in public life and you feel that you know best what you can do to achieve, you do it, and then you take the pressure for it. 2 years later, Governor Hunt decided to free Ben Chavis. And I went to Ben and I apologized to him for having to make him a sacrificial lamb in that. He was very grateful, because his concern was getting the younger people out, and felt that he could take it. And Ben and I had a friendship before then. We had a friendship after then. And so that was another example of how I try to get people to understand compromise is not necessarily a sellout. It is a process toward achieving a longer term goal. And that's what we've got to have leaders to do. And young leaders have to recognize that there's always going to be resistance, and nobody's ever going to give in everything, but they have the ability to make a difference beyond just making noise and achieving outcomes.
Thank you for that. So on the topic of radical change, you've been talking about some of the most, notable things that you've accomplished while you were in office. I've been very curious to know if there's something else that you would consider pretty radical that you've done that a lot of people maybe aren't as aware of that you've done during your time?
Yeah, I saw that on your question, and I racked my brains to try to see what I may have done to bring that about. The one thing that I did, and Dr. Jones kind of hinted at it when he was introducing us. During the civil rights movement, there had been some really nasty interaction between the police and a lot of the civil rights demonstrators and some of the young people, especially what the group called Chapel Hill 9. Now, I was not here, so I came later. But when I came in, there were those who really were not happy with certain members of the police force. And when I became mayor, the one thing I really wanted to do was to get people to understand that police had to be much more than just arresting people. And so, and I felt that we probably should change the structure of both law enforcement, fire department, and emergency medical services. And so we created something called the Department of Public Safety. And I had a assistant manager for public safety, and the police came under that along with fire and so forth. It didn't go over very well with a lot of people because the police chief didn't want to give up his position and the fire chief wanted to remain his identity. So then I came back and said, okay, we will put social workers in place. And those social workers will be assigned to the police department. And what will happen is when you get a call about a domestic dispute, instead of going and arresting one of the parties, the man mostly, we'll send the social workers to work out some counseling and never have to put anybody in jail and never have to put the pressure of having to bond someone out. That went over a little bit better, even though there was resistance from certain social workers who didn't think that was in a proper role for social workers. That was considered rather radical at the time. Now, I did create the Department of Public Service, but as soon as I left, they changed it back. But one thing, I did get the social workers in, both in the police department, and I put social workers in the housing, public housing complexes. And so that did stick. So when Dr. Jordan, referred to the crisis unit, that was the spinoff of that. A lot of people don't know that. And I was frankly surprised when I got asked to go speak to a group in Kansas City, Missouri, because they wanted to know how the crisis center in Chapel Hill survived all of these 50 years and is still going strong and is a success. That one was a tremendous success, and that was considered radical because no other police department anywhere in the country at that time had really taken the bold step of putting social workers in the police department. So that's one.
Thank you, Mayor Lee, for that answer. It's interesting you talk about having social workers go to these calls instead of police officers, because that's a big topic discussion of today, especially after the protests last year, after the death of George Floyd. And that brings me to another question. And also for the audience, if you have questions you would like to ask, now would be a good time to start putting them in the Q&A chat, and then we'll open it up to you right after this. There's been uptake, mainly in protests over the last year, and young people of many different backgrounds, so you could hit the streets. I mean, the George Floyd protests are probably the largest in the nation's history. At the same time, there's a lot of people who who empathize with the cause, but don't want to protest. And of course, just a lot of stress with the presidential election, the coronavirus, and other issues that are affecting our nation. What is the message you want to give to people our age or younger who are facing burnout or stress from everything that's going on? And I guess what has kept you going all these years through the multiple decades, the multiple challenges you faced?
It is so easy to become frustrated and develop feelings of hopelessness. I have just been so determined, and my determination started when I was 15 years old. When I absolutely resented, just absolutely resented being the treatment that were extended both to my parents and to me, living in a small town just outside of Atlanta. And so I went into a bathroom and there was a big sign that said colored, and I just resented that. So I went to the white men's bathroom and used it, but then I decided to take a peek in the white women's bathroom, and that was a mistake. And I was accosted by a group of white guys who were standing outside the door when I came out and got roughed up, but I got away. But it also changed my life. I made a commitment to myself at that time. I would never leave the South. I would stay, I would fight. I didn't care how much it cost or how long it took me, I would do it. And I've never left the South except to go to Korea in the Army and go to work during the summer. I tell young people that you really do have to be committed to making a sacrifice if you would like to be involved in bringing about change. It doesn't mean you have to give up your life. It doesn't mean that you have to put yourself at great risk or great danger all the time. But it does mean that you decide how much you can contribute, how much you can accept, and you stick to that very focus very clearly on that, and not become allowing yourself to be eaten up by the very thing you claim you're hoping to change. So my whole style has been that I feel that I have been placed here for a purpose. And that purpose, although when I was 20 years old, I said by the time I'm 40, I want to be a millionaire. But as I grew older, I began to recognize that money is not the basis for which I was placed here, but I was placed here to bring about change and to inspire and to engage in making a difference in life. I have never sacrificed the quality of life for my family. I've always been blessed to have a job that allowed me to have the flexibility. But you don't have to do it 24 hours, and you don't have to be engaged 7 days a week. You determine how much you can afford to sacrifice, and then you give it all you can give it during that window you have designed for yourself. I do find myself becoming very frustrated with people who could make a difference and who don't. I see so many young boys that need role models, and people who could be good role models just don't do it. There's a young man that's running an organization now who grew up in Charlotte and who was mentored by a person from an organization called 100 Black Men. And he was he came out of a single parent, his mother family, and his mother was using drugs and doing a lot of other things. He became a scholarship, got a scholarship and became an honor student, graduating from UNC, and now is running a nonprofit. There's a young man in Durham that I thought would be in jail when I was at Duke by the time he's 15. He is today a successful CPA in Durham. So my point is that if you just take one person and work on that one person, but don't expect to go out and make a lot of noise and disrupt and think that you've done something great. The goal is never to destroy. The goal should always be to build up. And I just don't find it to be very valuable to take things down. I think it's much more valuable to build things up. There's a group of us who've been working for years to build something in Raleigh called the Freedom Park. And the Freedom Park is now on target to become a reality, because for the last 40 years, we have been working hard to build the Freedom Park. That will be a place where you can honor people for the contributions they've made, and there are other people who are doing similar things. But we older folk have to make ourselves available to younger people like you all to be able to have the kind of conversation we're having now about what your interests are and what you would like to be able to do and how you might be able to do it, and to learn from what we did to be able to do it. So that's a great question. And I get challenged occasionally by my daughters who think that I should probably stop being engaged so much. And but even they now are recognizing that we have to be available to younger people to help them see what roads we have traveled. As when I was running for lieutenant governor, and I was being very sarcastic with this older Black woman who was trying to tell me some things I should do, and I was telling her, I know what I'm doing, kind of thing. And she said, "Son, I've been where you're going, and I'm almost back, and I can tell you what's out there, and you don't know nothing." And it might have been a little gruff on her part, but at the same time, if we can pair the older folk with the younger folk, I think we could be able to help understand that you don't have to be disruptive, but disruptiveness is fine on occasion, but there has to be something that follows that disruptiveness.
Thank you, Mayor Lee, for all of your insight on these topics. I think it's been greatly beneficial for everyone to hear sort of, what you've been doing and your legacy that you're leaving. And also, thank you for these inspiring thoughts and for all of your hard work. So we're now going to transition into the Q&A for the audience, or from the audience. So I'm actually going to start with a question from Esther, and she says, "The greatest challenge before us today comes by way of attacks on the right of all citizens to vote, targeting people of color, and strategies for state legislators to be able to change the results of free and fair elections. What are your thoughts about this, and what can we do to thwart these efforts?"
I go back to using my same line. The more things change, they seem to remain the same. I remember when my parents were trying to vote, and they were required to read the Constitution in Chinese before they could get a ballot to vote. I've watched people through the years march and protest, and these were people on the right. They were extremely conservative, but they were Democrats who were really preventing people from having access to the ballot and to polls. Democrats, when we were in power, unfortunately, gerrymandered in a way to keep Republicans from getting elected. And now Republicans are doing the same thing. I think we're in for a long fight, but I think it's a fight we will ultimately win. I frankly am not willing to take the attitude that some have expressed to me recently about it's a lost cause. It's never a lost cause. There are enough decent people in our state of North Carolina, for example, that we can get enough votes to take out almost any person. So my goal is to continue to travel the state, talk to people. I've offered to travel on behalf of any organization and any candidate who stands for the right thing. I was sorry to see that, well, no, I'm not sorry, because David Price has really served well, and he served long, and he served honorably. And this is a district that probably will elect a very progressive Congress, a person to represent us in Congress. But in other sections of the state, it's a little more difficult. We have to find ways to enhance and increase voter turnout. If we do that, we could make a difference. One final point. In 1976, I lost the lieutenant governor's race by fewer than 60,000 votes. We had about 200,000 Black folks that did not go to the polls across the state. So my point is that if we get people to go to the polls and vote in the numbers we know they can, then it doesn't make any difference how much gerrymandering these folks do. You can still outvote them. And in Chapel Hill, the one reason many people didn't think I could get elected in 1969 was because of the percentage of the Black vote. With the combination of coalition between progressive whites and Blacks, we were able to make it happen. And so I think that's what we'll have to do in North Carolina. We just have to get out and really work harder than we've always worked harder, and get the vote to the poll. But we cannot sit back like I'm hearing a lot of people do and complain about how bad it is, how terrible these legislatures are. We can't do much about what they do with gerrymandering, but we can beat them at the voting booth if indeed we do it in a concerted way. So my goal is to keep fighting, and as long as I can drive and be available and make a speech to encourage people and inspire people, that's exactly what I'm going to do. You know, if we just got all of the churches on the same page, all of the Black churches on the same page, and got everybody to the polls like they're trying to do in Virginia right now for the first time. For the first time in Virginia, they are finally resolved to poll souls to the poll. And that is a winning formula if indeed we do it. There are people even on the right who are decent people. Not many, but there are some. And we can persuade those folks to do the right thing.
Mayor Lee, thank you for answering that question. That is the issue, probably one of the biggest issues you're facing right now. When you talk about legacy, actually, Breonna Webster Campbell, who's the daughter of Judge Joe Campbell and Diane Webster, she's in the audience today.
Right.
And she wanted to thank you for establishing your scholarship. She received your scholarship when she was in high school, and then went on to UT Chapel Hill, where she majored in health and policy management. And she's been working in the nonprofit space for nearly 20 years. And she just wanted to say thanks, to have an influential Black leader in the city of Chapel Hill while she was growing up, and that you have achieved your legacy of inspiring young people to achieve the unimaginable. So still, it really highlights your comment that it's sometimes it is one person decided to do the right thing. You never know when the effect you have will end. It may never end. So.
I have to give a lot of credit to my wife, who really has also spent a lot of time working to keep the scholarships going under the Martin Luther King Jr. banquet umbrella, and And she has touched the lives of so many young people. So between the two of us, we feel that we've been blessed to have that opportunity to do that. So thanks very much, Diane.
I do have a question from Lauren Ann Rafferty. Oh, sorry. You mentioned about county and high school systems merging and integrating. Why? Her question was, why are counties like Halifax County, Roanoke Rapids County, Roanoke Rapids City, and Orange County, why are they still separate from each other? Or why are they still having issues with integration today?
Well, Orange County and Chapel Hill were relieved from the legislation that was passed in 1992, forcing every other school system to merge. Orange County and Chapel Hill had separate systems for so long that there was just impossible to get the two systems to come together. And in order to do it, we would have to have a vote between the citizens in Orange County. That vote never took place. I was in the Senate at the time, and of course, I got tremendous pressure to put it on a vote basis for the citizens of Orange County. Roanoke Rapids pretty much the same. The geographic differences within the county just didn't seem to come together in a way that made sense. And so we reduced the numbers of school systems from 136 in 1990 to 115. So that's why we have 115 systems in 100 counties. And I don't see any possibility of getting these two systems together. But they are fully in their own sphere. They are fully integrated and desegregated.
We've got one more question that we can squeeze in the few minutes that we have left. And this one is from Deborah Wilder. And first of all, she says, thank you, Mayor Lee, for your long service to the residents of Chapel Hill. And she mentions that you were her mayor during her matriculation here at UNC. And her question is, with your background in social work, what mental health services would you suggest residents of community advocates, would you suggest residents of communities advocate for students as they try to navigate this new normal?
Well, I certainly think having available qualified counselors to work with young people is extremely important. And of course, a lot of that is being conducted through the crisis units, in this case, in Chapel Hill. Megan Johnson, and who heads that unit, and others have done a wonderful job in serving the community and creating counseling services that have been extremely beneficial. But you know what's even more encouraging to me is that the idea of a crisis unit has now spread to practically every other police department in the state of North Carolina. And that to me is the one of the appropriate places in which to base these. And why do I say that? Not because I don't think mental health clinics and social service clinics are not capable of doing it. It's that usually when there's a mental health crisis, the police department is the first to receive the call. And I frankly don't think it's a good idea to have a policeman show up in some cases without having somebody there who can ratchet down the situation, as long as it's not violent and so forth. So I'm strong for that. The other is that I just think we need to make decision makers in our various institutions more sensitive to recognizing when a student is experiencing a mental health crisis. I was just so disappointed, not disappointed, but certainly dismayed to learn of the 2 or 3 students on campus who committed suicide. Somehow we've got to find a way to identify and recognize the signs when a student is bordering on crisis. And it may very well be that the School of Social Work, in our case on the campus, needs to be more engaged with helping people develop their sensitivities. But the other is, I really think we need to advocate for students being willing to open up and share the experiences they're having, both in their homes and in their community. In this day and time, which was not as much of a problem during my time in early service as it is now, when people are struggling with their sexuality, when people are struggling with the pressures of whether or not to go to college or whether they can do better in class, teachers and counselors will need to identify these crises early and call attention to try and help. I believe, and I've been involved in this for a long time, that we have to stop putting pressure on kids to go to college. Every child does not need to go to college, and we can give a lot of relief if we had counseling to talk about other options that they could pursue that would help them gauge a quality of life. So those are some thoughts that just come off the top of my head, but I'm delighted that the question is raised, and it's one that we need to move higher on our list of priorities.
Thank you so much, Mayor Lee, for taking the time to be here virtually with us today. I know that Daniel and I both appreciated it. I know that the panelists appreciated it, and I know that the audience definitely appreciates it too. Let's see, I believe that's about all the time that we have for today. So Dr. Jordan, if you wanted to give us some closing remarks, then we can end the program.
Well, while he's coming on, just let me say that I'm grateful to both you and Daniel for being willing to moderate this discussion. It's been a joy for me to have a chance both to meet and to engage with the 2 of you. Anytime I can be of help to either one of you, or someday you'd like to have a cup of coffee and chat, please don't hesitate to give me a call, and we'll get together and sit down and kind of chat about whatever may be on your mind at the time. And to those of you who stayed tuned in and stayed with us, thank you very much for being very much involved. And for those of you who submitted questions, I appreciate it. I hope I'll be around long enough and we might be able to do this again sometime. But thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor Lee, for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone that attended. Also, if some of you came in a little later, you want to see the whole webinar, there is a YouTube link in the chat posted by Sharif, if you want to go back and watch anything or watch it later. But it's about 1:15. Thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of this beautiful day. You know, you don't get blasted by the sun like I did. So have a good day.
Thanks.